And joining us now, Janice Stein, the director of the Munk Center for International Studies, and someone we like to call our own foreign affairs observer here at TVO. Hi, Janice.
Hi, Steve.
Good to have you back. Let's talk about Egypt. Egypt used to be synonymous with the center of the Arab world. Now I suspect people think more Dubai, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia. What makes you think people still think Egypt is number one?
Egypt has the largest Arab population. It has the oldest universities. It has the deepest and long-lasting culture. And I guess finally, Steve, Egyptians think they're the center of the Arab world.
Yeah, but are they out of touch on that?
Only to the extent that there is so much money that's poured into the Gulf. And so you look at Dubai and Qatar and the rest of the Gulf, and you see all the art museums and the commerce. But nevertheless, Dubai is being bailed out this week. That's not happening in Egypt. If you really look at the heart of Arab culture, when it came out of the desert, when it came out of the Arabian Peninsula and really took root, it took root in the two great cities, Damascus and Cairo, and in a sense of enduring over time, of not riding the waves, but just being there over time. It is Egypt.
Okay, follow up here. Yes, it's the most populous Arab country, 80+ million people. Median age, 24. Official unemployment rate near 10%.
Much higher.
But unofficially much higher. So add all those things up, and what do you get at the end of the day?
You get a society that is really fascinating because it struggles with what you see a lot around the world today. If you actually look, if we start with the Egyptian economy, because the biggest problem is creating jobs for all these young people who are coming into the labor market. Look at the Egyptian economy. 20 years ago, highly regulated economy, state-owned, looked a lot like the economies of Eastern Europe in a sense. It would have been very, very comfortable there. Government has pulled way back. Egypt is one of the leaders in telecommunications. When we put out a contract for building a telecom network, especially wireless, an Egyptian telecommunication company got the contract for us in Afghanistan. Now, why is this? Because it had the most inefficient infrastructure you can imagine in the 1980s. When you got on a bus, half the people were inside the bus, half the people were hanging on to the outside. Massive investment in infrastructure. Egypt is, in that sense, changed beyond recognition.
Well, but let's talk about that government role in the economy, because Bill Clinton once said he had rarely seen a country as, quote, utterly stifled by government regulation as Egypt. Is the government's role in the economy still too big?
You know, we might have answered that question one way before the last
Sure,
4 months.
fair enough.
And what we know is the Egyptians have reduced their role in the economy in comparison to where they were even 10 years ago. Have they done it enough? Well, let's talk about one concrete example. Bread in Egypt is subsidized by the government. So the real cost of bread is 1 cent. That's probably a sensible decision in an economy that has so many poor people. It's certainly not something that the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank would support, but it actually explains the capacity of the Egyptian government to endure over time. It provides the basic subsistence needs for the urban population.
I wonder if this statistic as well helps explain the poverty. Only 60% of Egyptian women are literate. Yeah. That is, over 15 years of age and able to read and write. The comparable percentage, for example, in the United Arab Emirates is 82%, 60 versus 82. Why would that gap exist?
Much smaller population in United Arab Emirates, much higher per capita income because of the oil money, and a really limited, poor public educational system. One of the things you see when you go to Cairo, and we don't know the number of people who are living in Cairo right now. The estimates are anywhere between 14 and 18 million people. When you go to Cairo, there are suburbs of Cairo, people coming in from the countryside. People have no papers. They really have no identity. They don't have access to schooling. They don't have access to the basic health services. And who's providing these services? But for for the outlying areas of Cairo, it's all done by the mosques.
Follow up more on that in a second. Can you paint a picture of what the government's role is in the average person's life on a day-to-day basis?
What an Egyptian will tell you, our government provides fundamentally, I remember a conversation that I had with an Egyptian. Fundamentally, we were talking about this subject, and the answer was, our government provides basically one service: security. It is invasive, it is pervasive, it spies on its own citizens, it's everywhere in front of you, beside you, and behind you if there's any issue of threat. It's absent when there's an emergency. So if you have any kind of natural disaster, the mosques are in 48 hours a week before the government, and it doesn't really provide the basic social services that people are accustomed to getting from their government. What it does do, though, is it subsidizes food, bread, and cooking oil. You look at the huge differences in the infrastructure. The roads have fewer potholes. If driving from the airport to the city in Cairo, fewer potholes than driving from Pearson to downtown Toronto.
No, come on, really?
On my word. On my word.
You know, you could argue that people have fewer problems with authoritarian governments when they, quote unquote, make the trains run on time and run a basically efficient society. Yeah. Is that the case? Are you arguing that's the case in Egypt?
No, it's not efficient, but what the Egyptian government is very efficient at the 2 or 3 things that it decides to do. It has internally espionage and secret police and secret services that rank among the very best in the world.
Or worse, depending on
depending
how you
on how.
it.
But if you're asking, are they efficient? Very. Very skilled, very efficient. Infrastructure, huge improvement. But the rest of the range of social services that you and I would expect from our government, this government is not there.
I was interested to read that this country technically has been under a state of emergency ever since Anwar Sadat's assassination,
That's right.
and that was 1981.
That's right.
Why has Hosni Mubarak not lifted that?
We're talking really about almost 27 years of emergency, and the emergency law, which went into effect at that time, allowed the Egyptian government to, first of all, suspend the formation of political parties. That's now been rescinded, that part of it, but also to take all kinds of emergency measures when there are political results that the Egyptian government doesn't really like. Probably the biggest opening, the biggest pressure came when the Bush administration pushed really hard from 2001 to 2003, before the invasion of Iraq, but after 9/11, for an opening up of the political process. And you had, in 2005, probably the most open parliamentary elections that we've ever had. There was genuine competition among the political parties. Now, it was in 3 rounds. The first round produced a really interesting array. The president got a little nervous, shut it down a little. By the time you got to the second round, you'd narrow the field to virtually all the usual suspects. And by the time we got to the third round, you had fundamentally the president's political party win.
Well, let me pick up on the president, Hosni Mubarak. I'm not sure, what is he, 76 or
79.
79?
79, 80, 79.
Do they know who's going to replace him?
That is the biggest single subject of cafe conversation in Cairo. Those who are really pessimistic about changing, and when they say changing the government, they really mean pushing it to open up. Nobody talks about any kind of overthrow of the military regime, which has been in power in Egypt since 1952.
Well,
so it's a long time.
Wait, they call themselves a democracy. So you're saying...
But you notice that they've all been led by generals, right? We've had 3, since the revolution in 1952, Nasser, Sadat, Mubarak, all military generals. So essentially we've had a form of collaboration between the military and generals who cross to the other side of the house. Everybody thinks, those who are pessimistic, that it's going to be Hosni Mubarak's son, Jamal Mubarak. And
is he a general?
No, he hasn't made his way through the army in the usual way. And so there's a real struggle going on at the highest levels of the regime now. Mubarak's wife, her ambition is for her son to succeed his father, but the army is reluctant. And we will know a lot about where this regime is going if the army is able to have its way. The Democrats in Egypt, who think that they're very small, it's a very small number, and it's been under tremendous pressure in the last 2 years. There's actually been a closing down. The Democrats who think that there'll be any kind of relatively open selection process, unfortunately, are dreaming in Technicolor.
Well, let me mention the name of one of them, Saad Eddin Ibrahim, who is one of Egypt's leading human rights advocates and pro-democracy forces. You've met him?
Yes, many, many times.
What kind of a guy is he?
He's just an extraordinary human being, and he actually told me a wonderful story that our viewers in Canada, I'm sure, would like to hear. He was arrested and imprisoned 3 times before he came to trial. And during the time, and he was arrested for what is called defaming the Egyptian state, which under emergency law is this very, very broad general entitlement, which fundamentally means if you do something or say something that we don't like, we can arrest you for defaming the Egyptian state. It's unclear exactly under what circumstances he broke his leg when he was in jail, but it was not set properly. And so he's left permanently disabled as a result. He had a cast on for a long period. And when Flora MacDonald was in Egypt, after she was foreign minister, but when she was in Egypt, she insisted on going to visit him in jail. And the warden of the prison did not know she was not foreign minister anymore. She was introduced as the foreign minister from Canada. And she knelt down on the floor to sign Saad al-Din's cast. From the time she did that, the quality of the treatment that he got in jail changed immeasurably and made the rest of his jail sentence tolerable.
Very interesting.
He's in exile now, can't go home.
Where is he?
Why? He travels. He lives in Qatar. He spends a considerable amount of time in the United States and in Canada. Why is he in exile? Because he was one of the people that organized the Arab Democracy Forum, which brought 500 people from across the Arab world, journalists like you, broadcasters, writers, people interested in democracy, NGOs. And because he organized the Arab Democracy Forum while the conference was going on 2 years ago, the Egyptian government charged him again with defaming the Egyptian state, knowing full well that he probably physically could not survive another term in jail. He hasn't been back to Egypt.
Okay, 2 more questions and about a minute and a half to go here. The Muslim Brotherhood, where are they right now in the political process?
Muslim Brotherhood is probably the strongest political force in Egypt, very strong in Cairo, and for precisely the reasons that I just mentioned, Steve. They provide the social services. They're in the community. They connect with the people.
So they're popular.
They're very strong, very popular. There are shades of opinion inside the Muslim Brotherhood, but this government, in a sense, one of the reasons that it's so fixated on security, it is determined to prevent the Muslim Brotherhood from ever coming to power.
And just finally, Egypt, of course, has long set the bar for many areas that people look to, Arab nationalism, socialism, political Islam, and so on. What sign will you be looking to in the year ahead that suggests Egypt is still the heartland of the Arab world?
If Egypt can open up its political process, if it can make some space for politics, the sickness that Egypt suffers from, there's no politics. Can you imagine a society with no politics? You can't breathe. If Egypt can open up its political process, it has the most sophisticated people in the Arab world, most educated, the most literate, the most worldly. We've been waiting for that opening for 15 years. If Egypt can open, it will be the leader in the Arab world.
Great. Janice, as always, thanks for visiting us here at TVO. Best of the season to you. See you in the new year.
And happy holidays.
Thank you.